So welcome to the second in our ongoing series of webinar presentations for pyrotechnic subjects. These things are done in cooperation with the Fireworks Foundation, the Western Pyrotechnics Association, and PGI. We have a disclaimer that we need to discuss. So let's read through that real quick here. As you know, some of these pyrotechnic events require a certain amount of expertise and understanding of what you're doing. So this seminar is for educational purposes only. We suggest that anyone interested in amateur pyrotechnics joins a local club in order to gain proper education and mentoring. Never attempt a project which is beyond your level of knowledge or experience. It is the responsibility of the viewer to make sure that they are in compliance with all federal, state, and local laws and regulations. So with that, we're going to move right into our subject today. We have Pyrotography by Tom Calderwood. Tom is a, Tom is a longtime member of both PGI and WPA. He's an accomplished photographer. He was a professional photographer in real life. He's presently retired and now lives in Tennessee. So with that, Tom, let us hear what you have to say.
Well, I'm glad to see y'all, so to speak. And if you've been to my seminars at WPA, or if you were over at PGI many years ago, you will probably have seen this. A few things have been added on, but we'll get right into it. And it takes a second for me to line up the buttons. There we go. So I call it pyrotography. I'm using digital format, but I'm sitting on the shoulders of people who shot and film. And so a lot of the things that are applied for digital can probably be applied for film. And real quick, right off the bat, this is the way I shoot. This scratches an itch. And I'll show you what that itch is. And your itch may be different. So what am I doing? I'm looking for pure colors, pure form. And I'm looking for something that we don't normally see if we see fireworks just with the naked eye. And in the end, you may or may not like what I do. So you do what you do that looks best. So here's that itch. I'm gonna take my little guy here, turn it into a laser pointer. And you can see right here, these are red stars, but they look like a white streak with a red halo, especially this going up here. There's a green and a red one, so the colors get a little bit washed. And so what I try to do is to go more for the pure colors. I want to see if it's green, unless you're Ozzy Osbourne, you hate green. I want to see green, and I want to see those lamp black stars and how they paint the sky. I want to see the reds, the whites, the blues, the yellows, the greens, the reds. I want to see just the color. I don't want to see that white streak in there anywhere. Smoke is smoke, but you know what? The color, some of the colors that we're seeing, especially right now that are coming out, are absolutely fantastic. And some of the effects that you get with the salami shells, where you get the rings that are going off, the timed reports, it just paints a beautiful picture in the sky. And this is at Winter Blast, and you can see that it is fairly close to the audience, but just the colors that are there. And we'll discuss it in a little bit why I really, really, really desire those colors. So we're going to head into kind of a text part of the talk here. Priorities. Enjoy the show. We all shoot fireworks or are involved with making of fireworks. And regardless if you've got a camera or not, enjoy the show. I know that if I put a lot of time and effort into it, I want to have people enjoy it as well. If you're really going to the show to take pictures, you've got to scope location. It's just like in real estate. What's important is location, location, location. I try to shoot for the trifecta, which is reflections, people, and landmarks. When you're doing if you shoot fireworks at a PGI convention or a WPA convention, a lot of times there are no landmarks. And so you're just going for the image in the sky. And that's fine. Just make sure you know what you're going for. And then look for things that obscure your view. And these are things that when you show up, you may not see them, but you'll see them on the picture. So literally, you get there a little early, take a picture, look on the back of the camera and see, do you have single light fixtures or power poles, or are wires in the way, or there's signal lights in the background, things like that. One of the things that I do, that one of the reasons why I like the pure colors, is about 6 years ago, I had surgery. I'm blind in my left eye, and I had surgery on the right eye to remove a cataract. What happens with cataract is it creates a film that's on the lens, and it causes a slight discoloration of the lens, and it causes a loss of contrast. And so the brain has this marvelous capacity to adjust things to make your mind say, hey, it looks white. And as the lens yellowed, white changed, but I didn't know it. And if you're thinking about yellow and blue, it creates kind of a greenish cast. And so blue wasn't blue. I didn't know that. And then contrast. A car would be coming at me head on, and the headlights would hit. It's just my entire field of view filled with a glare of headlights. So if you can imagine salutes going off, I was closing my eyes and turning my head. It would give me headaches. But then afterwards, holy cow. About 4 days after the surgery, my wife and I, when I lived in Southern California, my wife and I had passes to Disneyland. And one of the things we love to do is you just go and watch the fireworks show, have some dinner, get a ride or two. And we went just for the fireworks show. And I'm standing on Main Street, and just the neon bright colors, and being able to keep my eyes open when you get this, just a rapid fire of salutes and all. About halfway through, my wife leans over and says, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Nothing's wrong. Why?" And she goes, "Well, you're crying." And I had literally forgotten. It was just as if somebody had flipped a switch. And those colors are what I want to see on those pictures. So that's why I do that part. So let's get into the meat of the things. The camera. Do you have to have a multi-$1,000 camera? It helps. But as long as you put everything on your camera on manual, you'll get some pretty respectable shots. And that's a biggie. Cameras like to take control of stuff, and I can understand that if you're taking snapshots of kids and pets, and I do all the time. That works out really well. But when it comes to fireworks, it doesn't work out very well at all. Your talent for taking pictures is huge. We hear it all the time. It isn't the camera, it's the photographer. I agree with that. But take a good camera and put it in a good photographer's hands, and you're going to have great pictures. So the equipment can take you up into shooting things that you probably wouldn't be able to do with a cheaper camera. So I'm always fighting the battle of new lenses, new cameras. I call it the Nikon acquisition syndrome. And we go for that. So you can buy anything if you have the money. If you want to go crazy, this is a great excuse to do it. So the lens. I have my camera here, and I'm going to stop the share real quick to show you. This is the camera that I use, and then this is the lens, and I don't know if I can, yeah, you can see it's a wide angle lens. It's a 14-24. And in a show, there's real high stuff, there's stuff on the ground. I want to try to catch it all. So this is a camera that has a lot of megapixels, and it allows me to crop, and I can actually crop out things and get pretty close to them. With a wide angle lens, it allows me to get it. Otherwise, what you're doing is you're moving during the show, trying to catch eye, trying to catch low. And in the end, stuff disappears off the edges. And so a good camera is good. A great lens is very, very important. So let's go back to the screen share. The one unfortunate side effect of having a wide angle lens is a wide angle lens distortion, and we see that in some ways. Now, some of the lenses, they give you a fisheye type effect. So telephone poles, you know what, I'm going to stop the share real quick so I can demonstrate this with my hands. Sometimes you see a fisheye, and the telephone poles look like that. Well, I spent quite a bit of money on the camera, so the telephone poles look like this. It doesn't matter if you're the left or the right side, they're very straight. But the moment you start to look up, the poles do this. They kind of come together. Now, they don't bend. They're still straight, but they're not parallel to the ground. And we'll see some of that here in just a second. So that's one of the things that you're going to run across with wide angle distortion. There are some workarounds that you can do inside of Photoshop and Lightroom and things like that, but pretty much I just kind of live with it. And then you don't need a fast lens. What I mean by fast is a lens that can see really, really good in the dark. But you need a sharp lens. And we'll discuss that. And I'm talking just for pyrotechnics. So a tripod. We're going to stop the share again. I didn't plan this part out very good. I'm going to show you. A lot of people will buy these big beefy tripods. And this is one I got at Best Buy. It was $79. It's a piece of crap. Does not do what I want to do, especially with a heavier camera with a heavier lens. It starts to wiggle, a little tiny bit of a breeze. It moves all around. The controls on it, you know, we've seen these where you loosen the handle and you can do that. It doesn't work. If you need it, use it. But if you can, your next piece of equipment to buy after a camera and a good lens is a tripod, and would have something called a ball head on it. So a ball head is a device where I loosen this up and the top of the camera swings all the way around. So I have two adjustment knobs on it. One is to keep it from twisting, and one is to loosen this up. Some of the tripods will have a lock mechanism, and the camera goes on, and bam, I'm set. It's in and its place. So they call it an Arca Swiss mount. And I tell you what, after you do with a ball head and things like that, yeah, you will not go back. It's almost a necessity for doing this. All right, center post. A lot of cameras, they kind of cheat. The legs are lower, the post is higher. Well, that center post adds all kinds of instability to the camera. And at that point, even with a good tripod, just the mirror opening or any kind of movement inside the camera will cause shake in the tripod. So take that center post, I lower it all the way down unless I absolutely have to raise it. And then retract the legs just a little bit, like an inch. Each one of those little lock mechanisms retracted. If there's a bit of a breeze, take one and bring it in an inch and a half. And what that does is it keeps the legs from creating a sympathetic harmony, you know, that could cause the camera to kind of sit there and spin around a little bit on top of the tripod. Spin is the wrong word. You just get a little bit dizzy. There we go. I'm watching two different PowerPoints here, so I apologize for that. So there it is, especially in a breeze, retract one leg. Remote shutter release. No matter what kind of tripod you have, if you touch the camera, it'll cause the tripod to shake, especially if you're zooming it with a zoom kind of lens. My best advice is if you have the tripod, you touch the lens, count to 2. slowly, count to 2, let that vibration reduce, and then you're going on. Some require wired, some require wireless, and sometimes you don't have a choice, but I prefer wired because I've never run out of a battery on a piece of wire. And once you get one, I'm serious, you will not regret never getting one. And if you don't have a shutter release, then use the shutter delay. You know, that little thing that says, I'm going to take 10 seconds and run around to the front of the camera and stand with the family and get the Easter picture. Well, you can take that, probably back it down to about 2 seconds. So you can hit the button, keep your hands off. 2 seconds later, it's going to make an exposure. And we'll see a little bit how to do that. So my gear, let me stop this one more time. It's a Nikon D810, and I also have a battery pack on the bottom that I will take off when I'm shooting pyro, because I want this as light as possible. I want it as steady as possible. This adds just a little bit of a shake. Wide angle, this is a 14-24 lens. And my remote shutter release looks like this, and it's just a simple button. And when I say bulb mode, when you do it in shutter, sometimes you can go down and say 1 second, 2 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, every time you hit the shutter. And then there's something called bulb, and what bulb says, shutter opens up and it closes when I let go. So I'm the one that determines how long that exposure is going to go. There's one that you can get that's an intervalometer, and they kind of look like this or very similar, especially in the Nikon world. This lets me take fantastic star trail shots, timed exposures. I use it for sunset, time lapses, things like that. The problem is there's a little lock that's right around the button, and it's easy to lock that thing into place. So I wind up spending quite a bit of time trying to figure out why the camera's not firing, and it's simply that the lock is in place. I don't need all the bells and whistles. This is the one to get. Simple is good in this case. All right. Woohoo, where'd my cursor go? There it is. Just a little bit more talking, and then we'll start showing off and getting into that. So know your limits of the camera, and if you shoot within those limits, your pictures will be spectacular. What I see a lot of times is people want to try to go beyond the limit of the camera, and the pictures turn out less than desirable. So keep within the limits of the camera. But to do that, you need to know the limits, and to know the limits, you need to experiment. So this is a real good reason to go out and shoot fireworks. So here's what I mean by within the limits of the camera. This is a picture I shot. This is back in 2008 now. My daughter's Canon Sure Shot. At the time, I think it cost $115, and I put it on top of a $15 tripod. A lot of people like to shoot in the golden hour. I prefer what's called the indigo hour, where there's just a little tiny bit of light left in the sky, and you get that beautiful blue. And I did everything what I just talked about. I set it for a 10-second, hit the button, stood back, make sure I didn't touch it or anybody else didn't touch it. And it took a pretty respectable shot. Now, this right here is a smudge on the lens. That was my fault for not cleaning the lens. And you see the people walking, and they're just kind of ghosted. So it's a long exposure. But what I want you to do is look at this and tell me, what does that sign say right there? Now, I went back later and I realized, I didn't know it at the time, but with my big camera, I took a similar picture. And there is that sign. You can very clearly see that it says Hollywood. So this is a case, and by the way, this is way past the indigo hour. They had already announced California Adventure to be closed, and that's why there's nobody on the street, no ghosting. And I was just goofing around and experimenting. But this kind of shows you, this is within the limit of this camera. That is outside of the limit of that camera. So just kind of a quick little thing. That's what I mean by shooting within the limits of the camera. On that cheap one, later that night, I walked over to Disneyland, and when they don't do Phantasmic, you can get right up onto the edge of the rivers of America. And if you stand at the Nikon photo spot, you will get this shot at one point. During the fireworks show, they shoot the Mickey in the sky. And so I made it a project one summer to shoot that Mickey from all different kind of points of view. And this was really, really good. And it's well within the limits of the camera. But here it is with the big guy. And the difference, besides lighting of the dock and things like that that are different, is you can see the reflection of the Mickey in the water. And now you can't. So the lens was able to pick up stuff. And then the camera itself just couldn't deal with the fireworks. And again, it's the white streaks with the color halos. You can see the good color in the water. That's because water knocks some brightness off of things on reflections. But the big guy, I got a spectacular shot, great detail everywhere. The color's good. I just really like this shot a lot. So I would not be able to get the shot with a cheaper camera, and that's kind of what drives me. A little bit about the settings on the camera. You have to figure out what your subject is. It's the old Ansel Adams thing where he took these fantastic pictures of the full moon over Yosemite, and people said, how did you make that exposure? And he said, well, I figured out what the subject is. It's the moon, and then I exposed it as if it was a bright sunlit object. And so what is your subject? Your subject is not the night. Your subject is a very bright flaming object, but the camera thinks you're taking a picture of night. So you have to override all those settings because the camera cannot deal with that. Even if cameras have fireworks settings, it cannot deal with that. Your focus has to be on manual. And so how do you focus? Look for something on the horizon, either horizon line or a light in the distance. Focus on that and then take your focus and put it on manual. There's usually a light. I mean, at Winter Blast, you'll see a signal light way out there, something that you can turn around and focus. And further out you go, probably is the better off. And then auto anything, turn it off. Auto ISO, auto exposure, auto aperture, anything that goes automatic, you have to take control. Because again, the camera thinks you're taking a picture of a night sky and you're not. Shutter speed, we talked about the bulb mode. And then if there are objects in the shot, then I will adjust the shutter speed for the object. So the aperture, the thing that says how big is the iris, that is exposing for the pyro, but the time is exposing for something that would be the subject in the shot. So let me, yeah, if you're, a lot of times people will recommend, hey, just set your camera to shoot every 2.5 seconds and make it a 3-second exposure at f11 and you'll be fine. It doesn't work for me. Here's another thing that just itches me. This is a picture of a shot that is taking place, the shell is bursting, but it's after the burst is done. So you see this amoeba effect, and that's because it's starting to expose as everything has already left the middle. And so you have this kind of two-phased effect where you've got a blank spot in the middle and then it kind of burns out. That really irks me. And so I try to keep from doing that. But here's a case where it actually works. Sometimes a show designer will throw up something and then they'll do it 2 or 3 times. This is at Qualcomm Park. It's at the KGB Sky Show down in San Diego, California. Radio station KGB. And they threw up 5 hearts. And when you put a heart and you expose it right at the very beginning, it really doesn't look like a heart. And I found just by accident that hearts, if you expose it after the burst, looks like hearts. And so they did 5, and it was everything I can do to wait and wait and wait and wait. Heard the burst, hit the button, got 5 hearts. Now, trust me, there's 5. Yep, settings, turn anything. ISO. A lot of people will say, take your camera, set it to ISO 400 or ISO 800. Again, very bright flaming object means you have to lower the ISO, not raise it. and lower it to where your camera is native. And what I mean by native is it's as low as you can go without having to get into cheat settings. So I have one camera that its native ISO is at 64, the other one is at 100. Set it as low as it'll go without cheating. Next thing, the bulb mode, we got there, get an early test, we talked about that. And then here's my recommendations. It's f18 to f22. When you have a cheaper lens at f22, you're going to get some weird aberrations. You're going to get some discolorations. Or use an ND filter. And I'm going to stop sharing here real quick and show you what I mean by an ND filter. ND is neutral density. And what that is a filter, and it's kind of hard to see. I'm going to put my hand behind it. It's just like a pair of sunglasses, but you can see the color is not different. So it's darkening things without changing the color. Think of it like a pair of gray sunglasses. There's another kind called a variable density. And this one you can see quite clearly. You can see my eye in here, and I'm going to start turning this thing, and you can see it darkens dramatically to the point where it's almost pitch black. And this is what you're going to use if you're doing a long exposure in the middle of the day. This works out okay, but I like repeatability, and there's no markings on the side that I can write down or anything like that. So I have a tendency, if I'm using an ND filter, just one that I bought that is a single exposure, and that will allow me to reproduce it if I want to come back the next night or if I'm in the show. And then this is the bugaboo. You will be post-processing if you use these settings. There's a thing called dynamic range, and you've got a very bright object and a very dark background. That's not the dynamic range I'm talking about. I'm talking about the difference between a red star and a blue star, or glitter. So if I throw up something that's charcoal in it, it burns at a very low temperature, not a lot of lumens coming out of it. If something is blue, same thing. It's a fairly low temperature, not a lot of lumens. If you shoot something in red, you've got a whole bunch of light coming off that thing, and it's hot, and especially if you go to white. That range of heat and the amount of lumens or light intensity that's coming out at you, that is the dynamic range I'm talking about. It's very obvious if you try to shoot red, white, and blue at the same time, where you see lots of red, lots of white, and the blue is almost invisible. So you will have to go in and post-process. That's another seminar. It's a lot more technical. So we talked about a good shot. Let's see some pictures. And these are failures and successes on my part. One of the first winter blasts that we went to is when we were doing it off, we were shooting the show off the point, and it was right next to the water on Lake Havasu, and I could go over by the aquatic center on some of the dunes over there and shoot across the water and get these reflections. And this is with a pretty early crappy digital camera, but you know what, I got it, but then I noticed there was something wrong. When you look at these kind of things and you see that there's a pattern, so you see these hooks and they're all exactly the same, or a wiggle that is all exactly the same, that is what I mean by tripod shake. I didn't have a remote shutter release. It was on a cheap tripod. And so if you see something that's like that, where all the patterns are the same, you can tell the person was not being very careful. This is with my big camera with a really good tripod. I forgot the remote shutter release. I went and took the picture, and you can see right here, there's a little hook that looks just like that hook, that looks just like that hook. So that's what you want to try to keep from doing. Just because there's a pattern sometimes, though, doesn't mean that it was a bad tripod. This is a bunch of parachute flares, and as they come down, they spin. And so there is a repeating pattern, but they're not exactly the same. And then this is a case where the picture went off and I kicked the tripod and it just destroyed the picture, but I kind of like the effect. It was real cool. So I just hang on to that one. Camera's do's and don'ts. Remove the filter if you have it. You know, that little clear piece of glass that's on the front that's supposed to protect the camera or protect the lens. Remove it. That's going to create a reflection, and the reflection can cause these weird ghosting phenomenons. Clean the lenses. Clean the filter. Keep them clean. When you're out in a field, or if you're at Winterblast and you're on the track, or you're at PGI and you're sitting on the track or on some grass or something like that, there's dirt that's flying around and it just wants to get on front of your lens, and that will create these little starbursts, little dust bunnies. And so if you see something that's very bright and specular, the little bits of dust can also cause that to cause a reflection. If it's just a little bit drizzly, I'll show you a picture a little bit later on. The drizzle gets to the front, creates a pretty bad thing. Don't forget to charge your battery, clear your card. This is all normal stuff. It still has to be said. And because it's the dark sky, your files will compress quite nicely. So I'll say just bring one card so you're not trying to swap cards in the dark. And then take a shot for a shot. I'm going to go and turn sharing off one more time. This is a little bit, this is something I learned, and it was a little bit interesting. And I just put my hat away, so I'm going to use my handy dandy dust mask to kind of illustrate this. In the old film days, they would do an exposure and then lock the shutter in place, take an exposure and then cover it with a hat. And then when the next firework went up, make an exposure. And then they would do this, right? And that's the way they were able to take 2 or 3 or 4 shots and put them all together into one. The problem is, think about this, when you buy a roll of film, that film is developing. It is not developing, it's exposing. It's always exposing. That's why if it's exposed to a little bit of light, it's going to catch it. It's always wanting to suck light. And the moment it doesn't is when you stick it in and put the chemicals in it and you try to develop the film. Digital cameras don't expose all the time. They expose when you hit the button down. So the longer the exposure, you're going to start getting some grain or some different patterns in there. You may see some streaks. So you don't do the hat trick when you have to do it digitally. I never really thought about the exposure part before. That was pretty cool. Somebody explained that to me. Oh, that's right. You go ahead.
I just wanted to interject here. We neglected to mention at the beginning that there is a Q&A button down at the bottom. So the audience has the opportunity to type in some questions, and I'll feed those to Tom as they come up.
Sounds good. Thank you. So anyways, exposure, we got that handled. You can do the hat trick in Photoshop. And like I say, that requires another seminar. And we'll see kind of a demonstration of that, shot for shot. And then never, ever, don't ever, period, ever touch the camera except. A Japanese photographer did this. I saw this in a periodical. This is a real fireworks shot, but there's a trick. And of all the shots that I've ever done, I consider this one the best one. And I look at this and I think, how did they make that shell? How did you do something like that? So I am going to stop sharing real quick. And what it is this old lens that was made in 1986, still being manufactured because it's a dynamite lens. It's very expensive, but it's all manual. I don't know if I'll put it by the microphone, but it's got the old aperture ring and it's got a manual focus ring. And the thing about manual focus is I can put it all the way out and I've got it tuned so that it goes right up to the point of focus and no further. And what I'm doing is I'm pulling it out of focus, the shell goes up, I expose with this finger, and then I rack it into focus with the other finger, or the other hand. So you start out of focus, rack it into focus, and you got to be real steady on the camera, and you're doing everything you can to keep from moving it, and you're breaking the rule because you will be touching the camera. But the effect, I mean, how cool is this? So anyways, when they say I did, did I monkey with it in Photoshop, this is the time where I can turn around and say, yeah, well, yeah, I did. But wide angle lens issues. I am almost at show center, and you can see on these three fans, the ones on the left and the right are looking like they're leaning in the middle. They're not. This is me looking up, and the outside edges are starting to lean in. During winter blast shows, I have a tendency to want to hang out by turn number 4 because there's a lot of foot traffic that happens in front of people and it gets right in the way of the camera. Well, you can see the fan on the left side looks almost twice as high as the one on the right side. That's because it's about half the distance from my viewpoint as the one on the right side. So these are some of the things you have to kind of watch. This is at, if you've ever been to Do It in with the WPA, they go to Hawthorne, Nevada, and you'll see a little shot coming up here. But in the lower left-hand corner, you see this weird angling thing, and there's a dark streak, and it's kind of angled. Those are straight up and down. And so I'm going to zoom in a little bit to the base here. And you can see that outhouse, the yellow one is kind of like leaning in, and the green one's straight up. Well, that's what's happening is that I'm angling the camera up so I can catch the pyro. I really like the effect of being able to see the brightness on the ground, and I just have to deal with some of the wide angle issues. And then those lights in the background, I can take them out if I want, but you know what? We're at Hawthorne, Nevada, and that's an Army ammo depot in the background, and how cool is it that we're shooting fireworks next to that? I mentioned about drizzle or rain a couple years ago during the members showcase. It started to lightly rain, and that's what you're seeing right here, and down here. That's little raindrops that are caught on the lens, and because there's a bright light right there, it's catching it and causing these weird refractions. And at that point, it pretty much destroys the picture. I put the camera away, and plus I don't like my equipment out in the rain. I put it all away and just sit back and enjoy the show. One of the best things I can tell you about location, where you're going to set the camera up to take pictures of the show is probably not where you're going to want to watch the show. And so this is why taking pictures of the best spot to stand is not going to get you the best picture. So if you're close, you got to watch out for wide angle issues. With PGI or WPA or something like that, usually our backs are up against stands and we can't back up past the fence. You can go on the stand, but everything shakes around. So you're still going to be pretty close, and you're going to deal with the wide angle issues. Watch out for the bright lights. Sometimes those lights, especially in the horizon, and there's nothing you could really do about it. You just, oops, pardon me. I just saw something here. Oh, there's a question came through. It says, do I have an ND filter to attach to that 14-24 lens? Or does it require a filter holder adapter? You saw the front of the lens, it was real bulbous. no ND filter on that lens. I just have to kind of stick with it and try to do what I can in post. On some of the other lenses, I do have an ND filter, but it's a flat fronted lens. So yeah, thank you. Good question. Let's see, watch for bright lights. We're going to watch for the smoke direction. Not too much we could do about that. And then if you know who is doing the show, you can always walk over or call them up and say, hey, when's the good stuff going up? When's the really unusual stuff? This is a shot from the Manhattan Beach Pier in Southern California. At the beginning of December, they do a fireworks show off the pier. So that's why you see a Christmas tree out there. Show designer in this case was John Noonan. Folks know him because he's such a great IT guy. He's a great show designer too. And he called me up and said, hey, there's one point in the show where we're putting up 15 Nishiki Komuros, and those are one of my favorite shells. And so this time I chose to start the exposure after they lifted off of the pier, but before they went off in the air. It was just a quarter of a second that I had. So we wound up with this kind of exposure. So you can get those special shots, and it also gives you something to kind of look for and concentrate on. It's a little bit fun. Here again is another shot from the pier. And you can see the people in the foreground, the boats back there. I'm up on what's called the Strand. And if you're familiar with the area on this one, I was around 9th Street. And I would take these shots and composite them together. This is kind of like the hat trick, but it's the Photoshop version. And for a while I was the newsletter editor. And so you can see there's the Manhattan Beach Pier out there. This part of the show is part of what you're actually seeing. And I think this guy here is. Everything else I composited in. And frankly, I don't have a problem with people compositing pictures as long as I know they're compositing pictures and they're not trying to pass it off as real. Same show, different year. Thought, hey, you know what? It's a low tide that night. So I ran out to the shoreline to try to get the reflection. The problem was all of a sudden you're seeing the reflection of the city lights in the clouds. It really wasn't that spectacular. And you know what? It was a big goof. I just shot away because there's no time to go back to shoot the rest of the show up on the Strand. And you know what? It's 363 days before the next show. So scoping it out ahead of time would have helped me to take a couple test shots. No flash. Turn that stupid flash off. How many times have we been in the stands and somebody's taking a picture of fireworks with a flash? Unless this was a project that where I wanted to, again, the Mickey in the Sky at Disneyland, and I saw the castle, and then here's that statue of Walt and Mickey, call it the partners statue. So I knew the Mickey in the Sky was gold glitter, and I was going to expose about f9.5. Remember, it's a lot cooler temperature. The castle at f9.5 was a 4.5 second exposure to get those colors. And somewhere in that 4.5 seconds, I fired off a flash. You don't have to, pardon me a quick second. Throat's going dry. And I left my water in the other room. In the end, I wound up with 2 flashes. My wife was on one side, my son was on the other side. And I hit the button for 4.5 seconds and I yelled out, now, and then they turned around and flashed from either side. It just has to flash sometime that the shutter's open. They flashed it once, put the flashes away, and enjoyed the rest of the show. And I went ahead and shot away. The other one is, Paul came up and said, hey, I got a special event. Can you take a picture? And he proposed to Emerald. In the back, you could see a little set piece. Emerald, will you marry me? And a little diamond ring. I was exposing for the background, flashing for the foreground. So These are the fun things that you can do with doing that. You can take self-portraits this way also. That's kind of fun. We talked about not being able to, not necessarily where you want to be to watch the shows, where you take the pictures. Landmarks, the pyro isn't the subject in this case. The pyro is accompanying the subject, which is your landmark, but it's still critically important. This is the KGB Sky Show. They're doing a comet walk around the top ring of the stadium. And a comet walk would go pop, 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 pop around one side, and then pop, 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 pop around the other side. But if you hold the shutter down, it looks like it went kablooey all at once. And you get this kind of butch haircut type of thing. Broken glass effect. I love the broken glass effect. And you can see there's parking lot lights in the foreground, and they're just blazing away. You know what? It's all part of the whole thing. Another comet walk with a bunch of beautiful gold in the background. And this way they're tipped, and they were kind of like leaning forward as it walked all the way around the side, and leaning back as it walked all the way around the other side. Hold the shutter open. It was a beautiful black sky. And that here's a fun, just a little fun one. That right there is a full moon rising. So I wasn't quite careful enough to figure out where the full moon would be or even worry about it. I do now. Mickey in the Sky. Like I said, I was looking at it from different points in Disneyland. This is on the second level of Innoventions. And this was back when you can do this for free. Actually, it was back when you can go into Disneyland. But when Disney is open, they now charge you some money to go up there, sit there in a chair, because this is a beautiful shot. The thing I really like about this, by the way, and these are the things that you catch, these two security guards. You can see everybody here is walking around, and they're just blurs. These two security guards, they see this every time they're there, and they're enjoying the show. How cool is that? Anyways. Queen Mary again in Southern California. I'm standing on the gangplank for the Catalina Express and trying to get everything, trying to get a reflection off of the dome. In this case, there was a whole bunch of white. This is during the finale. Everything was lit up as bright as it could so I can actually see the dome. Pretty cool shot. This was really hard to get. Over in Long Beach also, on the Shore Point Drive, there's a little fake lighthouse at the end. Helped out with the show, actually helped them set it up. This is a New Year's Eve show, and what's really fun with this one is it was streamed live to the East Coast, and so the show went off at 9 p.m. on the West Coast. We were able to get things and clean up the show, break it down, clean things up, and get back and enjoy New Year's Eve with our family after shooting a New Year's Eve show. This is an event that Pyro Spectaculars does. This is a training seminar, and they coordinate that with the city of Cerritos, and this is at something called Athletic Park, and they have a fair going on over here, a carnival. And then you see all this, and then with the water in the foreground in the park that's next to the sports park. So I saw this by getting a heads up that they were going to shoot it, where the shoot site was, looked it up on Google Maps, saw the lake, and what you don't see is the high power lines that are stretched right across the middle of between me and the pyro. Because at that point, they're far enough away, they're pretty much invisible. And I love the reflection on the water and how the rippling water takes those streaks and just kind of breaks them up. The problem is there's ducks in the pond, and so after the first stuff starts going off, the ducks start scampering away, and then they create this kind of globular mess. So I have to wait for the water to calm down a little bit, but I'm right next to where the ducks stampede out. So I call it, it's like you have the running of the bulls. In this case, it's the running of the ducks. Smoke, it is part of what we do. And I don't have to really tell people about smoke. We all know that how you orient the show, you're going to try to do it so that smoke isn't an issue, because you don't want anything coming back into the audience, but sometimes you're restricted just because of the way things are laid out. Not all smoke is bad smoke, and not all wind is bad wind. So what do I mean by that? Here's a shot where there's a whole bunch of smoke. This is the smoke coming at me, again at Disneyland. And it's kind of interesting. I kind of like this one. Not a lot of firework in it, but it's just the lighting and the reflection of the statue. It's really, really cool. I went to another night and there was absolutely no wind at all. And it looks like Disneyland blew up. So you need a little bit of wind. You don't need a lot. You need a little bit of smoke. You don't need a lot. After one of the shows I went over, this is a big granite ball that sits on top of a pocket of water and spins around. This was the last night before they took that thing and they actually moved it over to California Adventure. Those aren't clouds in the sky, that's smoke. And I was really worried because I wanted to see the top of the rocket, but the black sky would just be filled up with nothing. Well, the smoke actually filled it up and it worked out pretty cool. I really liked the shot. And one of my early winter blasts, we got blown out. I mean, sometimes with Havasu, you're in the desert, things happen with an attitude. And the only thing we could do was light fountains. And you know what? There's still a photo opportunity for it there. Post-processing. We won't get too heavily into post-processing. Like I say, it gets a little bit more technical. Hopefully I'm not boring people. We're just a little bit away from the end here. I use Adobe Lightroom. I have an Adobe suite, so I run an Adobe shop. Process things with Premiere Pro, After Effects, Illustrator, Photoshop, the whole 9 yards. I also shoot RAW plus JPEG, but I process the RAW. The reason why I shoot JPEG is I spend a lot of money on the camera, and sometimes the camera wins, so I'll just use that. I take it as a freebie. If you're post-processing and you're doing Photoshop and Lightroom, clarity is your friend. It will actually help to bring some of those dim things out. It works really well for blues. It works surprisingly well for little sparklies when you have these little dragon's eggs and you have the little sparks that break off. Those kind of pop. And you need to put a little bit of oomph to bring out shadows, like ground reflections and things like that. In this case, a cheap camera is going to give you cheap results. And the amount of post-processing you could do is probably you're not going to be happy with it. If your camera cannot shoot RAW, you got to get it right in the camera. And so some of the things that I can get or that we're showing may or may not be possible with your camera. So this is just a heads up. The only way you can do it, again, go out and experiment. And this is where I put things over the top. And I say it down here with color, brightness, and black, but I don't monkey with saturation and I don't monkey with vibrance. Color pops when you're dealing with contrast. And so you could really do a lot of influence on the amount of color that's in a shot by changing the contrast. Don't go overboard. Don't make it look fake, but I want it to look kind of how it looked to my mind's eye, but also how my mind's eye wanted to see it. And so that's where I go with that. And I do, if it's really bright, there's some tricks you could do to cool the brightness down. And if it's against a black sky, I don't want to see any gray or brown if it's foggy or smoggy. So let me show you what I mean by that. And this is where you can see the difference between JPEG and RAW. A few years ago, Extreme Pyrotechnics did the Saturday public display for Winter Blast. And this is the second go around of this particular shot. There's a person shooting video, and I cleared it with the guy shooting video. He was the one setting this whole thing up, and I'm standing over him. He's low on the ground. I'm standing high, and I'm hand holding this. This is not on a tripod. The three guys would walk towards the camera, and then the crew would sweep in from the side, and you can hear the theme from The Right Stuff playing, and then somebody yells out, 3, 2, 1, wham. 5 mortars, 3 gallons apiece, they go up, and here you can see that it's just starting to take flame. And I am shooting, in this case with fire, I'm shooting and letting my finger completely off the shutter and then shooting again. I've pre-focused and locked the focus, but now in this case, everything is an automatic because this is changing so quickly, so dynamically, I can't keep up with it. and I'm shooting it, I'm not holding the finger down and rapid firing. I'm forcing the camera to make an evaluation every single time I hit that shutter button. So here's the next one. You can see kind of the light still there in the background. It's starting to darken up a little bit here, but boy, the fire is just so hot, so intense. The camera is trying to compensate for it. And now the camera's finally getting it. And here it is, the final shot. There's everybody walking in the foreground. You can see the crowd. You can see the truck. This is what it looked like right out of the camera. And this is what it looked like after I monkeyed with it in Photoshop. And I needed, and you can see going back and forth, the fire is there. It's just not changing. And I had to go in and pull all that stuff up. But guess what? That's what I remember seeing. That's what I remember looking at through the viewfinder, was seeing that kind of image. This one took a lot of effort. I was real proud of this one. Let me give you a quick demonstration when we were talking about the yellowing effect with the eye and how people will perceive this. And I kind of use this as an argument when somebody will say, well, the blue on the picture doesn't look like the blue that I remember. Well, you're at Disneyland, you look at the Mark Twain, it's sitting there, and they had just restored it and or refurbished it, pardon me, and it had a brand new paint job on it. It was sparkly. Took the shot, and in my mind, I apologize, in my mind, I remember that's a white boat and that's a white deck. But then I took Photoshop and I said, right here, that's a white stripe. So look at that part right there, and I'm going to say, make that white. And look what happened. Now it's white, but you see how everything else suddenly, the color in the trees, the night sky, the reflections, it's all different. This is what it looked like when I had a cataract and I didn't know it. And this is what it looked like to my wife. So when I compensated and did some post-processing for pictures, she didn't like the results. I thought they looked fine. So when we're talking about the blue effect, white balance, if you leave it to the camera may or may not make the correct assumption. It's thinking something in the picture is going to be white. So in this case, white balance was set in automatic, and then I did it, post-processed it. And this is one of the reasons why you have to do that correctly. Chris Sprell with his colored flames, this is part of an experiment, and if the camera's trying to white balance automatically, we wouldn't be able to get these beautiful colors. And then timed exposures, this is with the bulb mode. You're going to see stuff you would never have seen. Falling leaves. How many times have we seen volleys of falling leaves go up and all we see is the little dots coming down? Boy, hold the shutter open. Just hold it open to try to resist the temptation to edit that picture. Just let it paint the sky. Here's a couple peacock fans. And this is, I've seen this also effect on a Z cake where it just goes, you know, flip-flopping back and forth. It's just a beautiful shot. This is falling leaves, but I was kind of on the downwind side, and so these are the things coming at me. We were being very careful to make sure that I wasn't going to get any on the camera. We were that close, but that's kind of a fun effect. And then this one, this is from a Do-It when it was back in Lake Havasu, and that's Wild Bill there on his Honda Trail 90, and he's dragging 3 sparklers that were made, and he's being chased by 2 guys on quad runners with Class C product in trailers firing off, and I just held the shutter open, and you can see right here his headlights on. That's what that streak is there. But these are large sparklers with pieces of wood holding it far enough away that he wasn't being touched, and then you could see, you couldn't really tell that the quad runners were out there. So how does that work out? Well, if you're at Winter Blast this year, you remember Pyro Pig. And Ernie was out there on a tricycle, and he had a trailer behind him, and it was just popping off some Class C. And this is a case where he went down and turned around and came back. And this is a 110-second exposure, which you can do when you have beautiful black sky, but you would never, ever be able to get a shot like this if you had that camera taking a series of pictures. Here is a pinwheel. It is just spinning down. This thing was so bright. This is really the only shot where you can see the pinwheel effect. And it's this really bizarre circle within a circle within a circle. And that is the pinwheel that they did. So beautiful, beautiful job. This is something else you want to do. If you're out taking pictures of fireworks, take the pictures of the people too. Take the pictures of the setup, take the pictures of the area. It just helps with the memories of everything overall. If you go to the WPA website, you'll see this shot on there. This is a bunch of coffee cans filled with flying ground balloons, launched up with a bunch of black powder. And this is a farewell to a longtime WPA member, Bill Daly, and he was part of that. And if you were to see this one live, it was just blam, zzz, you know, but seeing it this way makes it look really interesting. Palm trees. Palm trees is more of an, it's not just a star going out and then with a bunch of stuff drooping down. This is actually a palm tree. I mean, with the green effect, it doesn't last too long with the gold rising on it. When you have a timed effect, it just looks like a palm tree. This is pretty cool stuff. The other thing is, you can see symmetry. A lot of show designers and a lot of people who set up shows really concentrate on symmetry. There is specific spacing and specific angles. And as a photographer, I can pull that out so that how they put things together all of a sudden starts to make sense. You know, some of these cakes are going bung, 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 bung. They're shooting off left, right, left, right, left, right. And you don't see the symmetry that was designed into the show. You know, and you needed wide angle on this one. This was a pretty cool effect. But this is a star. This was a shell that was almost invisible. Again, it was lamp black kind of burning to a blue burnout. Almost invisible to the naked eye. I was real proud that I was able to pull this one out. I just love the blue in this one. Trust me, I did not monkey with saturation, with vibrance. I didn't boost the blue in any way. This is simply bringing it out and then monkeying with contrast. Red, white, or actually red and blue together, and they're looking pretty good. Variegated stars. I always thought variegated was Italian for floor sweeping. This is back at that training seminar with the red and the blues, all that kind of stuff together. We're approaching the end here. And then finally, the insanity that sometimes show designers will put in. And this was a very memorable night for a lot of people, but want to wrap this part up, and I will just point out here that if you have ideas for seminars, or if you want to do a seminar, send an email to seminars@westernpower.org, and the next time Dr. Bob Winokur is going to present our fireworks poisonous. So you see the time there. It's the same time that we're doing this today. Hopefully, I mean, right now, we're in Eastern time zone in Tennessee, and I am wondering what's for lunch. Yeah. And hopefully I didn't get too many people nodding off, but that's kind of the nature of the beast.
We probably have a few minutes left here. If anybody has any questions they'd like to type in, we'll stick around for about another 30 to 60 seconds. If none show up, we'll take our bows and leave. As Tom pointed out, next week we have Bob Winokur scheduled for a a good presentation. The presentation that was originally scheduled for this week, that was Kurt Medlin and Tourbillons, the wonderful world of winged tourbillons. That one has been postponed. It has not been canceled. We'll pick that one up when we can. And as Tom mentioned, we are, excuse me, I got the same problem you have there. We are looking for suggestions, comments, and ideas. If you have there's a question that just went by there, Tom. If you have any of those suggestions or ideas for seminars, please let us know. Let's see what else. Thank you, Tom. Very inspiring. Some beautiful work. I can tell you from personal experience that both Wanda and I have learned a tremendous amount from what you've been telling us for the last 10 years. So thank you very much.
And you know, a lot of photographers will keep things close to the chest, and I don't like doing that, especially in pyro. Pyro is a very visible and something that we all work very, very hard on. And as far as I'm concerned, the better the pictures, the better people are going to see how everything does. So again, that's another part of the reason why I'm so passionate about this.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for sharing your passion. I know I have enjoyed the fruits of that. I appreciate that very much. I did have a question. You were talking about wide angle lenses, and you did mention some focal lengths. What's the widest lens that you ever tend to use, and what is sort of your workhorse lens that you tend to use?
My go-to lens is a zoom lens. It's a 14 to 24 millimeter. That's this little guy right here. So he's not very wide. He's very big in the beginning, and he's got that weird kind of bulbous front. You can see how it's kind of rounded like that. And this is that one where the telephone poles stay straight. I have a wider one, but then it's a fisheye kind of look. I also have a 2470 that if I'm further back, I prefer to use that one. It has a flat front. I can put filters on it. But my go-to is that 1424.
All right, very good. Looks like the Q&A is sort of dried up, so I think we'll take our leave now. Thank you very much, Tom, and look forward to seeing everybody next week. And we will carry on with these webinars as we can. We did mention at the beginning the schedule changed a little bit, and that's because we're working out some risk issues, and we have full intention of going forward once we get those worked out. And I have every confidence that it will be fine in about 2 weeks. All right, here's one more question. No, no, just a comment. Okay, cool. With that, I think we're done. Thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you.